Hello, everybody. My name is Paddy Carter, and I'm going to talk to you today about the economics of development finance. So, what we ultimately want to do is identify the investments that will have the greatest impact and make the biggest contribution towards our mission of helping solve the world's greatest development challenges, as articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. But rather than just present you with what we think are the answers, we want everybody in the organisation to understand where those answers come from and to achieve a deep and shared understanding of what we're here to do as a development finance institution. So we want to build towards these answers from the ground up. This talk is based on a paper called The Economics of Development Finance, which you can find on our website, which goes into much greater detail and has all the academic references you could wish for. The argument breaks down into 4 parts. What do we mean by development? What has private investment got to do with it? Why do we need public DFIs to intervene in private investment markets? And lastly, putting all that together, where can we have the greatest impact? So we want to maximize our impact as an organization. What I'm going to talk to you about today is only half of what we need to do that. If we're going to maximize our impact, then we need a clear idea about when impact is outstanding, when it's excellent or good, or merely acceptable. First, we need to know what's desirable. Then we can start thinking about what's possible. Once we take constraints into account, we may find that we are not always able to make investments with outstanding impact, and we may maximize our impact by sometimes making good or excellent investments, more often than not. Now, another vital ingredient is additionality. We exist to do things that private investors are not. We don't have an impact by merely displacing private investors without improving anything. When we assess the impact of an investment, we first ask ourselves, what is the impact of that investment? And then we ask ourselves what contribution CDC is making towards that impact. So today we're just going to be looking at the impact of investments. Our investment decision-making process requires us to consider the impact of investments and our contribution towards it together. An investment might be high impact, but if we don't think that we're making a sufficient contribution towards it, then we won't do it. So what is development all about? It's about improving people's lives and protecting the planet. Quality of life is about all sorts of things: dignity, human rights, freedoms. But we're investors, and our domain is the economy, which is largely about people's material well-being, although people's experience at work is very important too. Economists divide everything that the economy produces into 2 types of thing: either consumption, which is anything that's desirable in itself, or investment, which isn't worth having in itself, but is what you need to make things that are. In the language of economics, reducing poverty is the same thing as increasing consumption. This isn't about what we think of as consumer goods in rich countries. It's not about PlayStations and designer jeans. It's about food, it's about housing, healthcare, transport, and all the basics of a decent standard of living. Now, lots of people won't be able to consume lots of nice things unless the economy can produce lots of nice things per person. An unproductive economy is a poor economy. These are 2 sides of the same coin. Now, most people get their income from working, and so the level of consumption that they can afford is set by what is called the real wage. That's the nominal wage in pounds or whatever currency relative to the prices of what you want to buy. It's your purchasing power. Now, from an individual's perspective, there are 2 ways to get better off. Either that your individual income can increase because you've got a better job perhaps, or the price of the things that you want to buy fall relative to your income because the economy that you live in has got more productive. Now, this can all seem quite abstract, and if we're going to think about the SDGs, then we would want to think in more detail about exactly which goods and services are needed to achieve those goals. But I'm going to skip past all that for the sake of time. And because I'm only giving a high level view here, what I'm saying may also sound quite theoretical, but when it's actually applied in the context of a real investment, it's not too different from how you might assess the commercials of an investment, and it's concrete. It starts from data: wages, expenditures, prices, revenues, and then we need accounting conventions to turn those raw numbers into something meaningful, like a return on investment calculation. And for some things, we might need to use a model to estimate things that we can't otherwise observe. So here are the bones of how to look at impact returns. When we make an investment, we raise productivity, and the benefits of doing that can go in 2 directions: to the firm, where it's shared between workers and investors, and to the customers, who enjoy a wider range of better products at lower prices. Economists call that consumer surplus. Investments have positive and negative effects on the productivity of other firms besides the one that you're investing in. Some other firms they help, others they put out of business. So, to size up the impact of an investment, we must add up all the changes in real incomes for workers and consumers across the economy as a result of the investment. If you set that against the cost of the investment, well, then you have the basis of an impact return on investment calculation. But the second thing we need to do is to ask who benefits from these changes and then to weight those benefits accordingly. $1 of higher wages or the benefits of lower prices, it's worth more to a poor person than it is to a rich person. Those of you with an economics education will recognize this idea as the diminishing marginal utility of consumption. Now, quite how quickly the impact of higher consumption on human welfare declines as people get richer is a question without a definitive answer. But if you look in the UK government's cost benefit analysis handbook, for example, called the Green Book, you will see that it assumes that the impact on welfare doubles each time the initial level of consumption halves. So increasing consumption from £2 to £3 has the same impact on human well-being as increasing it from 4 to 6 or from 10 to 15. Now, if you think about that, that's very powerful. You'd be doubling the impact of $1 many times as you move from the richest to the poorest people. Imagine what our financial returns would look like if each dollar was somehow doubled up like that, depending on where it came from. Now, our mission is to improve lives. So how much the impact of our investments are improving well-being of people, that's the objective we're interested in. And that's very powerfully influenced by who is benefiting. So this slide is about the environmental side of our mission. So the word sustainable means different things to different people, but in economics, it means that our standard of living does not fall over the long run, which it will do if we wreck the planet, especially if you include the natural world as part of our standard of living. It's worth having in its own right. So we invest to raise productivity to support a higher level of consumption, but climate change and the depletion of natural capital is negative investment. It's depreciation, it's destruction. Now, one recent estimate published in the journal Nature, based on the historical relationships between temperature and output, reckons that GDP will be reduced by 75% in our geographies under a business as usual scenario. And depending on what you think about the rate of growth before the impact of climate change, that could leave these regions of the world worse off than they are now by the start of the next century. So what does this mean for us? Well, it means that investments that shift the economy onto a sustainable footing have a big impact on development, and any investment which looks good from both a human development point of view, in the sense of creating jobs and reducing prices, but which is also making a difference from an environmental point of view, that's a double whammy for us. That's the technical term, I think. So, putting all this together, development requires three things to happen. Economies must grow to provide decent jobs and raise living standards for all. Economies must be transformed to become environmentally sustainable. And the benefits of growth must be shared across all sections of society. So these are our three strategic development impact objectives: productive, sustainable, and inclusive, that we're going to use to prioritize our investments. And I'm going to use these three themes to talk next about where we can have the most impact. So why do DFIs exist? Well, an obvious place to start is the fact that businesses in Africa and South Asia and elsewhere cannot always obtain the finance that they need on reasonable terms, and that means that socially beneficial investments are not happening. And that's before we even start thinking about the enormous financing gaps in the sense of the investments required to meet the SDGs. So one simple reason for the existence of DFIs is to compensate for shortages of finance. But DFIs aren't going to fill financing gaps with their own balance sheets. There are important projects that need external finance and cannot get it, so our money does make a difference in that very direct way. But at the same time, the greatest potential lies in changing the way the system works and in mobilizing investments beyond our balance sheets. But what are the underlying reasons why we need a public DFI to do this? These are called market failures, Market failures are various reasons why private markets leave room for improvement. You're all probably familiar with the idea that greenhouse gases are what is called a negative externality because the price of coal or petrol doesn't reflect the damage that's done by burning them. And we've used too much of these, and we didn't put enough effort into developing alternatives because we weren't paying the price. There are also positive externalities. There are benefits to society which private investors are not rewarded for in their profits and their returns. Society benefits from being there more and better jobs, but firms don't take that into account when they take hiring decisions. The overall social benefits from learning from innovation and experimentation are far larger than the private benefits. When economists try to measure these things, they routinely come up with estimates of social returns that are 5 or 10 times higher than the private returns. Now, if firms and investors could capture all these benefits from innovation in their profits, well, they'd do a lot more of it. But they can't, so they don't do enough. Regulations, taxes, subsidies, these are the main tools that governments have to correct for the differences between private and social returns and try and change the prices that private firms face and then lead them to get on with it. But even wealthy countries with lots of fiscal capacity to afford subsidies and powerful institutions to enforce policies, they still see the need for DFIs. And in Africa and South Asia and elsewhere, where governments have much less fiscal firepower, the need for DFIs to find investments with large social benefits is even greater. Now, we also need public DFIs to push markets in more equitable directions. Markets are an engine of prosperity, but they go where there's money to be made, and you don't get awarded with extra profits for investments that help poor countries grow or which benefit low-income people. This is a tough challenge for us, as we all know. We're not handing out grants. We need to find commercially viable businesses. But nonetheless, one of the reasons why DFIs exist is that we can have different priorities from purely commercial investors, and we can place a premium on investments in poorer countries and investments that reach poorer people. Now, a big part of tackling inequality is competition. When firms compete for workers and for customers, wages go up, prices go down. When firms dominate their markets, they can hold wages down and prices up. If we were a purely commercial investor, we would love that. Market power is where super profits come from. Creating monopolies is how Warren Buffett made his millions. I should say billions. But we're a DFI, so we want to see more competition, not less. And we need to stay away from making powerful incumbents more powerful. So where are the highest social returns from raising productivity? Well, the direct impact of an investment on workers and customers, it can be considerable. But as a rule, impact at scale is going to come from investments that affect many other firms. Take an investment in telecoms, for example. Cheaper and more reliable wireless internet access with more services will result in entrepreneurs, firms, lots of people starting to do things that they couldn't do before, and that will raise productivity. And there will be new investments happening all over the place as a result. There's very good empirical evidence that reducing the prices and increasing the quality and availability of what we call economic enablers like finance, connectivity, electricity, fertilizer, cement, and all these other important inputs to production will make a big difference to wages and to prices ultimately. In general, the question that we need to be asking ourselves is there a plausible sequence of events from this investment that will result in many other firms making investments and raising their productivity? Broadly speaking, those plausible sequences of events fall into two types, tangible and intangible. On the more tangible side, there are spillovers through production networks, where firms produce things that are complements to what other firms do and create new production possibilities. So those are the things like reliable electricity, improved seed varieties, and so on. On the intangible side, that means knowledge creation and catalyzing markets. So firms and investors learn something or they change their behavior as a competitive response, and in that way you can influence the behavior of many other firms. Now, to really understand spillovers, you have to do a bit of digging. Each sector is important for growth. All investments have a supply chain. There are thousands of intermediate goods that are inputs to somebody else's final goods. All firms have competitors. But not every investment is a high impact in this way, so context matters. Is this specific investment going to do something special? that's going to result in meaningful growth at the market level. And economists sometimes talk about an idea called a binding constraint on growth. And that's to get at the idea that many things are important for growth, but not everything is equally important everywhere at the same time. So the goal is to identify those constraints which are really binding and are really holding back growth in that place and at that moment in time. So I've mentioned outputs like power and fertilizer, but I must emphasize that we should think a bit more broadly than that. Finance itself is, of course, an input to production in a way, and a lack of it can hold back growth. And investments that do something to increase the financial sector's ability to get growth capital into the hands of firms that need it will be high impact. And the export sector is important too, because it produces foreign exchange earnings, where shortages are also a constraint on growth. So where are the greatest social returns from sustainability? Now, again, the direct impacts of investments can be considerable in terms of the greenhouse gases displaced or sequestered, and we know that we can get big numbers by helping the large carbon-intensive economies in our geographies become low-carbon economies. But as with productivity, the greatest impact will often come from investments that have effects that spread out across an economy. As a rule, we might make more of a difference by getting a ball rolling than we will by pushing on a ball that already has momentum. In terms of geography, that might mean going to countries where the renewable sector is still immature. And then in more mature markets, where wind and solar might perhaps start needing less public assistance at some point soon, we will need to be thinking about where the next frontiers are. So where can we push back those frontiers? That could be in supporting innovative green technologies for industrial heat, cooling, sustainable agriculture, water. There are many areas where the economy has hardly started to decarbonize and adapt. In general, because there's still so much to learn about how to green the economy, there's a great need for experimentation to find out what works. So the positive spillovers we might expect from innovative green business models and investments have the potential to be very large indeed. Finally, inclusivity. Opportunities for investments that reach those living on $2 or $3 a day can be hard to find. But there's no denying that they are high impact when we can find them. In general, we're looking for investments that either create better jobs, that are going to pull in people from the bottom of the income distribution, this idea of absorbing subsistence or informal workers into formal employment, or we're looking for investments that increase the availability, quality, or reduce the price of goods and services that meet their needs. In East Asia, poverty reduction was helped by large employers that could hire and train lots of low or semi-skilled workers. There are perhaps fewer such opportunities around today, but where we can find them, they're high impact. Increasingly, those opportunities are going to be in the services sector rather than in manufacturing. Something like 80% of people living in extreme poverty live in rural areas. The evidence is pretty clear that anything that increases productivity in agriculture and reaches a large number of farmers is where the most pro-poor investments are to be found, at least in the short run. In the long run, a country will not move from poverty to prosperity through improvements in agriculture alone. Finally, there are millions of people working in the urban informal sector with very low and precarious livelihoods, and anything that we can do to bring higher and more stable incomes to that segment of the population should be a priority for us. The digital economy offers great promise here, creating new opportunities that people can be reached with new technologies in a way that wasn't possible before. But there are also risks where the gig economy may, for instance, weaken workers' bargaining power. I hope you have found this interesting, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be more than happy to talk about this. Thank you.